Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Ashutosh Gildial and I'll be your moderator for today's session. This webinar is brought to you by Integra, a global partner to publishers and scholarly societies. We support end-to-end publishing workflows, including research integrity screening, peer review management, copy editing, and production. Today's topic, research integrity, has become one of the most pressing and widely discussed issues in our industry. In recent years, scholarly publishing has faced an unprecedented surge in sophisticated threats, such as paper mills producing fabricated manuscripts, peer review rings manipulating reviewer identities, authorship for sale, data and image manipulation, duplicate submissions across publishers, and increasingly AI generated or AI manipulated content. These challenges are no longer fringe or occasional, they have become systemic, exploiting workflows that were originally designed to ensure rigor and not defend against fraud. These challenges threaten the trust in science itself and also may have negative impact downstream in form of policies, protocols, and bad research being built on top of it. But we must remember, as we will hear from our speakers shortly, that research integrity is not solely about preventing fraud. At its core, it's about correcting the scientific record. And this distinction is an important one to keep in mind as we explore the topic further. As publishers work to safeguard and correct the scholarly record, integrity specialists are navigating new and increasingly sophisticated patterns of misconduct. This requires deeper investigation, stronger collaboration across publishers, and a hybrid approach that combines human judgment with intelligent technology. Today's panel brings together leaders who operate on the front line of this critical work. Their insights will help us understand how the landscape is evolving and, importantly, what practical steps the community can take to strengthen trust in scholarly communication. I'd like to share some housekeeping rules before we begin. All attendees will be muted by default. If you have questions, please post your questions in the questions tab. We'll try and address as many as possible during the live discussion. And any unanswered questions will be followed up by email. We'll also run a few live polls. Please participate and share your thoughts. And after the webinars, all the attendees will receive a link to the webinar recording. I'd like to begin by saying that we have a wonderful panel, and I'd like to thank them in advance for joining this discussion and sharing their insights with us. Before we begin, I'd like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves briefly. We have four industry leaders, Christina, Marie, Tim, and Adya, who work at the forefront of research integrity across different organizations and contexts. Let me start with you, Christina, followed by Marie, then Tim, and finally Adya. Christina, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Ashutosh. I'm happy to be here today and to participate in this discussion. My name is Christina Bennett, and I'm an editorial director and publisher at the American Chemical Society. ACS publishes about 90 journals, and I help support the strategy and development of the publishing program. Previously, I led the ethics cases and the ethics office at the American Physiological Society. I did that for about 10 years. And now, while it's not my day job, I help to shape the policies and practices at ACS and support research integrity initiatives within the broader industry. So I'm happy to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining for this webinar. I'm Marie Soulière. I'm the head of editorial ethics and quality assurance with the open access publisher Frontiers. In my previous life, I was a researcher in biochemistry and bioinformatics. In publishing, I've led peer review teams, integrity teams, and worked on developing one of the first AI review assistants in the industry, which is called IRA. It's a tool at Frontiers. In 2020, I was elected to the COPE Council, and this year I was also appointed to the STM Research Integrity Committee. As part of the work on these councils, with COPE, I wrote the guidance on AI decision-making in publishing back in 2021, way before ChatGPT. And more recently, I worked on the guidelines for guest-edited collections for both STM and COPE. So in general, I focus on innovation, governance audits, and overall ensuring that editorial programs meet integrity and quality standards. Thank you.
My name is Tim Kersjes. I'm the Head of Research Integrity Resolutions at the Springer Nature Research Integrity Group. I work with a fairly large and growing global team of research integrity advisors and specialists, where we help to clean up the literature, basically. So sometimes unceremoniously we refer ourselves as cleanup crew, but it basically means that we investigate and correct issues primarily post-publication, when research integrity issues are found in one of the 3,000 Springer Nature journals or in books. They get flagged to the editors, and we provide support for our editors to do the right thing. So we investigate research integrity cases and advise on editorial decisions. And I also serve on the COPE trustee board as well since 2022, I think.
Thanks, Tim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adia Misra. I'm the Associate Director, Research Integrity. Like many of my colleagues on the call, I lead the Research Integrity team at SAGE, and my role involves leading a group of research integrity specialists who are mainly involved in resolving publication ethics issues, regardless of publishing status across our entire journals portfolio. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Adya. Thank you all. It's an honor to be moderating this session, and I'm truly excited to dive into this conversation. I've structured our discussion into 4 thematic rounds, with each panelist addressing 1 question per round. This approach will allow us to build a comprehensive view of the research integrity landscape, from how organizations manage integrity in practice, to how the community collaborates, to the complex trade-offs involved, and finally to where this field is heading. So let's dive in. Let's start with the fundamentals. Research integrity work often begins when problems surface, sometimes immediately after submission, sometimes months or even years after publication. And in this section, we want to explore how different organizations approach integrity at the foundational level. Tim, I'll begin with you. Your work on research integrity often begins post-publication, sometimes immediately and other times months or even years later. And as you've noted, retraction cases generally fall into 2 categories: those arising from genuine errors and those involving some form of manipulation. Yet you emphasize that editors should treat both in the same way, guided by the spirit of correction rather than punishment. Could you please elaborate on this and how editors can adopt this correction-focused approach?
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of discussion still, sort of like the public perception around retractions, is tied in with misconduct, for better or worse. And there are good reasons why that is. So the reason why an article could be considered unreliable for whatever reason is that something went wrong somewhere, and quite often that could also be that someone did something wrong somewhere, and that can quickly get wrapped into discussions around misconduct. And I'm not saying that there are that no misconduct is taking place, but I always try to emphasize to editors that when we are doing a research integrity investigation and I'm asking them to make an editorial decision on what to do with something that's published, is that they are not engaging in a misconduct investigation. Editors have the responsibility over the reliability of the content in their journal, and that is what their decision should be on. Are the concerns with the article of such a nature that the readers of the journal can no longer rely on the validity of what they're reading? And if that's the case, the article should be retracted. Whether the unreliability is the result of misconduct or an honest mistake is, I think, for most editors irrelevant. And also, I think it would make an editorial decision to correct the literature much harder if you frame it as a misconduct investigation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And the correction-focused mindset really is foundational. And as you also say in your article, that retractions are designed to be a neutral tool to correct the literature. And that's something that I think we must wrap our heads around, and to be able to view retractions in the correct light and stop retraction shaming, as you also say, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I think if you also want to encourage authors to do the right thing, even when that is a retraction, it should be okay for authors to say, "Look, I messed up. I made a mistake. Article
Right.
doesn't hold up anymore. The conclusions are undermined. Let's just retract my paper." I would like authors to be able to do that without a fear of repercussion and retractions having a bad name. And I appreciate that it's a long game here and that retractions still have a bad reputation. But it is, I think, a key message that I share on every stage that I get onto, including this one.
Yeah. And while Tim's work often centers on resolving individual cases post-publication, Adya's role is about building integrity systems at an organizational scale. So, Adya, let me turn to you. Your role at SAGE involves consolidating research integrity activities across the organization and shaping the strategic direction of this work. And I read somewhere that SAGE has recently undertaken significant decontamination efforts related to research integrity issues. Could you walk us through what this involves and what you're learning from the process and how it is helping to reinforce your overall integrity approach?
Of course. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I lead a team of research integrity specialists, and we have responsibility across our 1,300 or so SAGE journals. And we're looking across publishing status, so we're not restricting ourselves to post-publication ethics cases, although that is how we started. So we started as a very small team working on concerns, complaints raised by readers, and we very quickly evolved to detecting concerns post-publication, that we were internally auditing journals. And we've also started to look at looking more upstream, looking at processes that we can implement prior to publication to address some of these research integrity issues. Something that people in this space say a lot is preventing research integrity issues. We don't always need to prevent them. We need to address them. Some things require collaboration with authors, editors, reviewers. Some things need addressing in other ways. And some things, of course, need to be prevented so that we're not dealing with things post-publication. As an organization, I think what we're learning is that we do need to work upstream, but there is a tremendous amount of work needed post-publication as well. And effectively, we need to be much more collaborative. I think some of the inherent nature of the research integrity team at a scholarly publisher is that we need to work across divisions, across teams. We need to work with peer review. We need to work with production, technology teams. I think that collaboration is really key to a scholarly publisher, where nearly everything that we're doing encompasses research integrity issues on some level.
Yeah, thanks, Adya. And in our next session, we are going to delve a little bit more on the collaboration aspect. For now, let me go to Christina. And Christina, you bring a unique professional background. You've been a researcher. You've led publication ethics office. You've shaped journal and publication department policies. And you now lead strategy and editorial management for ACS journals. How has this diverse experience helped you and shaped the way ACS approaches research integrity, editorial strategy, and publication ethics today?
Yeah, I do think many of the scholarly science publishers at least have backgrounds in the research, so I don't feel completely unique in that aspect. What I didn't realize when I was getting my PhD was that my minor in bioethics would have so much of a play into my future. I really thought in the bioethics training, we talked a lot about what medical doctors do and, what ethics they should have to do no harm. But there was not much talk about research scientists and how what you publish and what you share has a huge impact and what can, go into therapies and treatments and understanding of science. And so, my journey into publication ethics really fit with my passion to wanting to teach more ethics in research. But I'm lucky now because ACS does have a great publication ethics office, and I work with them every day, not necessarily on the cases anymore, but on how to integrate the changing landscape that we're seeing. And the lens I try to bring is to help us think about, understanding what other publishers are seeing, and make sure ACS is ready to address similar issues as well as those that are unique to chemistry. We've adjusted policies and practices. For example, AI policies are continually being evaluated and thought about in the lens of authors and reviewers and editors. And then, as Adia mentioned, while we think about scale, what can we put into our workflows pre-publication to help us identify concerns? And will there be bottlenecks if the tools don't work really well or add more issues than what we do currently? And then from this lens, I get to think about what our editors and reviewers need and what training do they need, because they still are a key piece for peer review to think about the science and whether it's strong and accurate. And then how do we pair that with the tools that we can have at ACS to see how much to ensure that the content that we publish is trusted. And then if something goes wrong, we can always correct it post-publication, but we try to defend against that as much as possible. And so, I do think about it now as just a broader lens to think about it's more than just the individual cases, but having workflows in place and policies in place where, our staff and our editors and reviewers have the tools they need to make, what we publish trusted. So,
Thanks, Christina. And speaking of preventing, defending, pre-publication, and the tools that we can use, I would like to now move to Marie. And Marie, this connects naturally to your work at Frontiers, where technology and automation are playing increasingly important roles in how integrity is managed at scale. And in the recent Chemistry World article, which I read, where you were quoted, several of your insights they resonated strongly. You spoke about the rapidly evolving tactics of paper mills and the growing sophistication of AI-generated content, and the increasing reliance on automated tools to support integrity checks. And you also highlighted nuanced challenges, from detecting manipulated images to identifying tortured phrases that signal machine paraphrase checks. So there's a lot there, right? And what stood out to me was your balanced perspective that while AI can strengthen early stage screening, it also introduces some complexities in the editorial workflows. And with that context in mind, in practical terms, I think a lot of our audience would like to know how much time and effort do AI tools actually save editorial teams? And do these tools reduce workload overall, or do they primarily shift effort to other stages in the publication process?
Yes, that's the true question, isn't it? Is it even worth everyone's time to train to use the tool, to integrate the tool, and to be using them? I would definitely say yes, the AI tools really do save time and effort for the editorial teams, and I'll describe a little bit where and how. I'd say that I and others have been doing manual integrity and quality checks on articles for years, and the tools are built on that knowledge from experts actually doing manual checks to create these tools. And it means that then integrity specialists don't have to look at every single image in a paper to try to find the one image with manipulation. And in addition to this, frankly, it does increase the accuracy in addition to saving some time, especially for something like image manipulation or even plagiarism or issues with references. The AI tools are now more accurate than most humans are. So the tool not only saves time, but yes, also increases accuracy. And I think the best approach with all of these tools is really what was designed originally as the traffic light system with Frontiers over 10 years ago, and most teams now use this as well. And this is how you make sure you reduce workload also on reviewers. Because if the AI at Frontiers, it's called IRA, flags a paper as red, then it has to be thoroughly validated by an integrity specialist, and often it will end up being rejected. So there's not a shifting of human effort to later. It actually prevents a large proportion of problematic papers from wasting time at the reviewer and editor level. Yellow papers are the ones that will go through and be looked at after review and take into account also expert feedback. So I think these systems are really about optimizing the process and ensuring the right human expert, be it an integrity expert or a scientific expert in reviewers and editors, comes in to use their expertise in combination with the AI at the right time in the process, with then policy and guidelines to wrap all of this up and make it work. And as I've been saying lately, I think we're at the stage where we need to fight AI at paper mills with responsible AI from our side.
Thanks, Marie. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I do agree that if we are able to transfer all the knowledge of the work that we've been doing manually to AI systems and constantly correct them, we are going to see them helping us quite a lot. So with this, this section ends, and now we'd like to run our first audience poll. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for taking the poll. Looks like limited time and resources is the clear response, and I hope that the industry can do more to support with this. Now I'd like to move to our next section. In the previous segment, we established some of the foundational approaches and challenges that organizations face. And like I mentioned in this section, I would like to focus on collaboration, because one thing that's becoming clear is that research integrity cannot be solved in isolation. And now we'll examine a little bit about how publishers, institutions, and professional communities are working together to strengthen their collective capacity. And this will also address what we saw in the poll, right? Collaboration probably has the potential to address the challenge of limited time and resources. So my first question here is for Adya. And Adya, as you've seen, many integrity challenges today extend beyond the boundaries of any single publisher, from coordinated peer review manipulation to sophisticated paper mills operating across journals and platforms. From Sage's perspective, what forms of cross-publisher or ecosystem-level collaboration have proven most valuable so far? And where do you believe the industry still needs to strengthen coordination and information sharing, or a collective response mechanism?
Thank you. It's a great question. I want to start by acknowledging the challenges we have as publishers on information sharing. I think there's significant legal barriers at play here that we really need to be respectful of. But I really liked what you said about collective action, collective response, because there are things that we can be doing in our own spaces to strengthen research integrity. From my perspective, the most powerful ones are COPE and STM Integrity Hub. It's a place where publishers have come together and really set the standard for the industry to say these are the things we're all going to be committing to doing together. in our own ways. We're not coordinating day to day, but we understand the principles, we have a shared understanding of the challenge and our response to these challenges. What we haven't been so good at is alignment on when a problem is affecting all of us together. So I know you've mentioned AI-generated paper mills already and peer review manipulation. What is at the root of these problems? Is that something that we can start thinking about? Can we start doing more advocacy across the research sector to sort of say these papers are flooding our systems, causing complete operational collapse in many cases? I think you've already seen limited time and resources cited as a really big reason for not engaging with research integrity issues. What should we be doing in that space, I think, is a question for us to contend with. And I think there is a really broad question in my mind around what are we as publishers saying is unacceptable? What have we thought about is unacceptable from our perspective? Have we got values or shared principles that we're going to tell the research community that you can't mess with our principles? So for example, thinking around AI generation of content, I think we haven't done a terribly good job of being really upfront about this is unacceptable, because we're still learning, as is the research community. So I think there are some open questions from my perspective that will become clearer, I think, in the next couple of years as external pressures force us to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adya, for that perspective. Yes, it is very clear that action needs to be on the research ecosystem level, and a lot of work can be done with institutions and authors themselves, which part of the community is trying to address. And this is something that Christina has also been involved in. Christina, you were part of the working group of institutional research integrity officers and journal editors and publishers who came up with a report on recommendations for enhancing partnerships of institutions and journals to address concerns about research misconduct. And historically, what we see generally is there's some distrust between academia and publisher, right, which often slows progress. So I'm quite, we are quite keen on understanding how this type of collaboration took shape. And could you share your experience of being part of this group? What kind of key issues did it examine, and what were the recommendations that emerged?
Yeah, it was it's kind of early pandemic or late pandemic times we met. It
Yeah.
was a cohort of people who are research integrity officers, legal counsel, publishers, and editors came together online, and we talked about the pain points that we were having in getting corrections made and literature corrected in a timely manner. At times you think it's the institution's fault because they, go through a case and it takes over a year, and readers want to know what's wrong with the paper, and we can't say anything until the investigation is over. But what we discussed through is, the main point is the data. And if we can figure out what's wrong with the data that's being investigated, oftentimes what we learned was that oftentimes the research integrity officers become aware that there's a problem with the paper. They open up the investigation, and the journals wait for the outcome. The data issues are understood at an earlier stage than the culpability. And so we asked if we could just get the feedback on what's wrong with the paper much earlier than who did what and why and where and how. And so we did talk through those pieces. We also talked about, journals don't have great communication websites. Like, who do they call if there is a problem? And if you talk to a publisher or a managing editor or an editor, and then the case goes on for over a year, someone's left. Someone either at the institution has moved on, someone at the journal has moved on. And so there's breakdowns in communication because we just don't have continuous contact when things go on for a while. And then we also just learned more about the policies in place, why they can't tell us who's culpable until the things have been, students have more protections than faculty. We don't want to put anyone's reputation in jeopardy. And journals also, at least initially 15 years ago, we very much protected our authors and wanted to make sure we gave them as much space to make the correction and understand what was wrong before we passed it on to the institution. I think now we have such broader scale issues that it doesn't always benefit us to not share it with the institution at an earlier stage. So just working through those types of discussions of when is the best time to share information and can we get it back earlier to correct the literature?
Yes, that kind of collaboration, cross-sector collaboration is really critical. And though it can also bring operational questions to the surface, particularly around where responsibility should lie and how accountability should be shared. So on the question of accountability, Marie, going back to your thoughts on the use of AI assistance in publishing workflows, where should primary oversight and responsibility for research integrity lie within the scholarly publishing workflows? Should it be with editorial teams or peer reviewers or both? And how can accountability be shared effectively in an AI-assisted workflow?
I love this question, and I will go a bit into semantics here. But I don't think that research integrity should primarily be with journals and editorial teams or peer reviewers at all. It goes a bit back to what Christina was saying about institutions as well. But editorial teams and reviewers should validate research and papers, but I strongly believe that research integrity should sit way earlier in the research process. It should be with authors and their institutions, and they should have the primary oversight, and they have more of the information than publishers do in any case. Editorial teams would be the second, and the reviewers would be the third level of integrity validation, if we look at it this way. And it would be lovely if publishers could actually focus on publication ethics, ensuring the peer review process is done with integrity and being the keepers of literature rather than having to police authors on actual research integrity. Following on what Christina was saying as well, I would say that in an ideal AI-supported world, there would be an AI-assisted workflow throughout the research lifecycle that would follow the research to support researchers. And that would start with storing the original data and validating the metadata of the experiments from the beginning, raising any issues or concerns directly with the institutions, research integrity officers, before a paper even gets to a stage where it can be published. And the AI validated data would also be then written up with the paper, and the metadata would follow all of this with funding numbers, with ethical committee approvals, all the way to the publishers. And in terms of the accountability, this kind of AI assisted workflow, it still remains with the humans at every touch point. The authors are accountable for the data and the research itself. Their institution would be accountable for ensuring the validation. The journals, the editors, the reviewers are accountable for the peer validation and maintaining publication ethics, and even with the support of all of these AI tools. I think the tricky thing in that kind of accountability and workflow is going to be where the accountability lies in terms of AI malfunctions and the inherent biases that will create issues throughout the way. There is some reluctance in AI tool providers to take accountability for their actual products. They will generate something that they think publishers or authors want, but there's biases and they don't necessarily want to either disclose them transparently or go back and fix them. So I think that will be a place where it's going to be very important to be attentive. And because I personally don't agree that you can remove yourself from the accountability of what you've created in terms of AI tools.
Yeah, thank you, Marie, for sharing that perspective. So what I take away is that research integrity is a broader term, and only publishers cannot be accountable for it. It is authors and institutions are also equally accountable. Publishers can be accountable for publication ethics, which is to do with the publishing processes rather than research integrity itself, which lies more upstream. And Yeah. So, and these questions about shared accountability become even more pressing when we think about scale, and how we communicate with the broader community about the corrections that we make to the scholarly record. And Tim, this connects to something that you've written about the public perception of retractions. Most people tend to associate retractions with misconduct, and which is why retractions often carry a negative reputation. And you advocate for a more balanced perspective. And you also highlight the risks of differentiating too sharply between different types of retractions, uh, or creating separate rules for them, noting that this can actually increase stigma. So this is the point that I would like you to speak a little bit about why such differentiation may be counterproductive.
Hmm. It's counterproductive, not necessarily because of the stigma, but I think it's counterproductive quite literally that it makes it harder to correct the literature. And that also harks back to what Marie said, with sort of shared responsibility and accountability lying with other people in the entire research enterprise, from coming up with a research protocol to the ultimate end product, which is the published article. And research integrity issues surface in the article, and that's why people look at publishers a lot, look at retractions a lot, but actually the authors of that article are employed by institutions somewhere. So there's I think definitely a shared accountability there. I made the point about not trying to make any differentiations in retraction types on the back of an ongoing debate in sort of like the research integrity literature, which is very meta on its own, where people have been proposing to come up with different types of retractions or retraction notices. So you could have sort of like a green retraction for honest mistakes, a yellow retraction for we're not quite sure, and a red retraction for misconduct, so like a traffic light system. I've read proposals that introduce 5 different types of retractions. I've read proposals that introduce 7 different types of retractions. But if you have 7, why stop there? Why not have 10 different types of retractions? So there's not going to be an end to it. And while I appreciate the effort in from those proposals to be as clear as possible, I think it will ultimately just make an editor's job impossible to come up with the right type of retraction, because there's always very limited information that an editor-in-chief has to make that determination. Basically, the only thing that an editor has and should base a decision on is the article that's published in his journal and the concerns that are raised with the article, together with whatever explanation the authors provide for these concerns. Any other stuff around what happened in a lab, who did what, and who's responsible for what, is, I think, beyond the remit of an editor. And I think that is then more for an institution to look into. So that's why I think that's sort of a counterproductive. Plus, it does add to the stigma. So I'm back to the stigma again. It makes the sort of like hypothetical red retraction even more stigmatizing. If an editor-in-chief has to say, yes, this person definitely committed misconduct, which I think is a very difficult decision. And I think as publishers, we should not ask our editors to make the decision.
Thank you, Tim. That's very clear. Now, before we move on to our next segment, we'll run another poll. Just give a few seconds to everyone. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for taking the poll. As expected, The top two answers are stronger publisher institution partnerships and shared cross publisher integrity standards, something that all of you have been talking about. Now we move on to our next section. So we've talked about frameworks, systems, and collaboration. Now I want to dig into some of the harder questions, which are the tensions, the trade-offs, and sometimes counterintuitive aspects of integrity work. And Christina, let me start with you. You mentioned the publisher-institution collaboration, which sounds productive, but I imagine it's not always straightforward. And the report from the working group that you are a part of notes that while institutions and journals share the same goals, maintaining the accuracy and integrity of the scholarly record, they often have different objectives because institutions focus on responsibility and accountability and journals focus on correcting the science, something which we also heard from Tim. So do these objectives typically align in practice, or do they sometimes create points of tension that need to be managed?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely points of tension. I'm sure anyone who's done integrity cases have found tension in trying to get information from institutions. Institutions have tension in trying to get clarification from journals. And the working group, I think the 20 of us who are sitting in that discussions probably have better readiness to try to make inroads with with our colleagues, but we didn't touch everybody, and so to get the broader realms of institutions and publishers to buy into this, will take some time. The institutions are doing the real investigation, and the journals are really trying to just manage the content that we publish and make the corrections that we need to. And those two do need to be separated. And so while we have interest to make the corrections as soon as possible, there is, delays or tensions and just us being able to move forward until we hear from the institution. I always was thankful if the institution gave us a final summary and said what was wrong and what errors were made, so that I could write a retraction notice that said, following an investigation, the institution said X, Y, and Z, and these are the errors that are there. You can send it back to the institution, make sure they agree with the notice, and then publish it. Because sometimes, authors will delay, the need for retraction, fight it. And then there's a lot of back and forth with with publishers trying to get a correction made. Having an additional backing that someone else supports this decision beyond the journal is helpful at times. And so, while there are tensions, there's also great benefits for us to partner with them, and just clarity, not, wanting to know all the details or the findings or, a play-by-play of what they're doing, but an understanding of the data that's involved. And, whether, their investigation, we might have sent in one paper that's a problem, and they might find that there's more issues at play. So, we have to think about this as a partnership as well.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. I do agree that tensions, that collaboration and the potential of collaboration and dialogue overweighs the tensions. And it's good and it's important to acknowledge these tensions. Marie, peer review sits at the heart of many of these tensions, and it's an area that's being transformed by AI in ways that aren't always straightforward. And my question is about the use of AI in conducting peer reviews by the reviewers. According to recent reports, many reviewers are already using AI to draft or refine their reports. And as we've discussed, this has the potential of good, but also, negative uh, things like lazy or unhelpful reviews. And how can AI be integrated into peer review without compromising independent judgment and the critical thinking that the process depends on?
Yes, there's a number of surveys that have shown this, and we have a Frontiers survey coming out soon that shows that 50% of reviewers are already using AI in one form or another. So the ship has sailed, and it's about making this useful now, right? one of the main problematic is really the aspect of confidentiality. I put this in the chat. Somebody was asking about this because manuscripts are in review. They should not be uploaded to external AIs as they will be ingested and the information can be reused, and it is a breach of confidentiality. So publishers have to be intelligent about this. And one of the best solution at this point is really to integrate a sort of chatbot AI peer review support system directly in the peer review platforms. And a number of publishers are trying that, because then it can protect privacy and prevent misuse. And you use that in a very organized format with governance, with information for the reviewers. So with Frontiers, we've been trialing this with some journals with the reviewers. It's really a simple chatbot that can summarize the contents of the paper, and reviewers can ask about the limitations and ways to check that the conclusions are supported by the data, these kind of things. And it's made very, very clear that this is a support tool to help write the report and not aim to replace their expertise. So far, 60% of the reviewers in those journals are using the tool. And frankly, the feedback we received the most is that they want the AI to be more intelligent. They appreciate the support, but they want it to support even more. And it was really helping them to focus on evaluating the research itself. So from this experience, it's really interesting because it doesn't seem like it would compromise the independent judgment. It's rather allowing them to be more confident in their focus as peers to evaluate the research, rather than feeling burdened in a way with having to spot some mistakes, to do some copy editing even, or publishing ethics, that is way outside of their specific expertise. We've spent years trying to train reviewers to do publication ethics, whereas this seems like it could reassure them that they don't need to do that the publisher will do that, or the AI will do that, and they can focus on really the peer expertise aspect. So I think that's really the way to go, and it can be done intelligently with the right safeguards to respect privacy and to support the reviewers.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. And recently, I think probably it was in the same article in Chemistry World that another use case is to help the peer reviewers refine their peer review reports, give them feedback on their reports, making the reports more useful, more helpful,
More constructive, yes.
more constructive, because we also hear a lot about, sometimes reviewers can be rude. And so, it can take care of all those aspects as well. So I thought that that's also a very helpful use of AI in peer review.
I agree.
Tim, you suggested something that might seem counterintuitive to many people, that we should actually encourage retractions rather than fear them. And we've discussed this in some of the other things. But generally we see a lot of perceptions in the research community where retractions, are considered bad up for an institution, and when they see the number of retractions going high, they think of it as misconduct primarily. But you emphasize that retraction should be seen as normal part of the publishing process, a corrective mechanism. So how can the community move forward towards embracing retractions as a healthy and expected part of scholarly communication? What message would you like to give to the community on the shift in mindset that's needed to make science more self-correcting? And here I'm talking more about the researchers and institutions and the broader research community, how they think of retractions.
That's an interesting question. I already mentioned that trying to change the perception of and the reputation of retractions is quite a long game. But think of it like this: I view a retraction of as an expression of an editor-in-chief taking their responsibility to their readers by very deliberately flagging that something is wrong with an article and that their readers should no longer rely on this article. Article is still available, people can still read it, that's fine. But I think it's clearly an editor-in-chief who's taking their responsibility, or a publisher who's taking their responsibility. And I would be, I don't know, maybe it's because being involved with retractions is my job, but I would be quite suspicious of a journal that never does any retractions. Does that mean that this journal has everything nailed shut. Nothing bad ever gets published. I don't think there's something like a zero retractions world ever possible, even without all the checks and even with the brightest peer reviewers and the best AI tools. People will always mess up. Stuff will always get published that following publication turns out to be wrong. So something that basically zero retractions is not something we'll ever go to. And I always like to encourage my editors, at least, to consider a retraction because it shows to their readers that they're taking their responsibility. And it's also important to know that retractions are for readers. Retractions are not for authors or about authors. It's really to signal something for the readership of the journal.
Thank you, Tim. And I know, Adya, you have similar thoughts. And Retraction Watch has noted that Sage was one of the first publishers to recognize large-scale peer review manipulation and begin retracting papers in bulk 9 years ago. And you've said that this is not necessarily a negative signal. And what Tim mentioned, that this is also something that should be considered, that the editorial process and the publishers are recognizing this and correcting and doing their job to correct the scholarly record. Could you please share your point of view on this, and what advice would you give to other journals facing similar challenges?
Of course. I'll start by acknowledging how long 9 years ago feels actually in this space, because things are really different in terms of scale. And building on what Tim actually said, I think it's fair to say that COPE is really clear on this. Retractions are not about people, they're about the record, they're about the research. And I understand that individuals who are at the receiving end, it can feel really personal, but it's not. We're actively trying to depersonalize the retractions process and really focusing on the scholarly record, the fact that the conclusions are unreliable. I think, Ashutosh, you said this at the start, that science is self-correcting, and I always say this to people who really worry about retractions. We're part of that self-correcting process. Science is not correcting itself by magic on its own. It is a process by which researchers are reading published content, raising concerns, journals and publishers are taking action to correct it. That is the process. And so it's an inherent role of the scholarly publisher to take action. It's our responsibility to create that version of record. So if we know that there are problems with it, we really need to act on it as promptly as possible. And I understand that there are challenges around taking action quickly, taking action at scale. It's really, really challenging. As somebody who's doing this all the time, I'm sure my panelists will agree, it's a really big task. My advice to other journals and publishers taking similar challenges is really taking stock of where they think their responsibilities lie, talking to their editors and their research community that they serve. They need to understand what their specific problem is. Not everybody is flooded with AI-generated articles. I think there are several other research ethics and publication ethics issues that are at play. People really need to start collecting data, talking to their editors to understand what is the problem that we need to solve and really start investing in solving it. Because this is like any other function in publishing. It's like sales, it's like marketing. It's really part of what we do today.
Thank you, Adya. Let's run our next poll. We'll give a few seconds to everyone to answer the polls. Yeah, so thank you everyone for taking the poll. It's clear that it's all about perception, and the perception about retractions is probably what is one of the biggest challenges, like we've heard from our speakers today. So now we'll move on to our next and the last section, Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of time left, so I'm not going to ask any elaborate questions. I will just ask one question and request the speakers to share their thoughts on that. So in this section, we want to know about, we want to look ahead to 2030. We've covered policies, we've covered practices, we've covered about collaboration and complex reality of the integrity work. We want to now understand where is this field heading and what should we be preparing for as an industry. And I would like to hear from each one of you about what you think that success really looks like 5 years from now. I could maybe start with Tim.
Well, as I mentioned in the chat, hopefully in 5 years I no longer have a job because no retractions will be needed. But jokes aside, I think in 5 years from now, in an ideal world, we'll be able to probably retract more articles in a swifter way. Partly because we get better at spotting things, partly because we are swifter at investigating issues, potentially with the help of better tools, but also because there might be less resistance to retractions from all stakeholders, because people will finally come to understand that actually retracting articles is a brilliant thing to do.
Yeah. Christina?
Yeah, so thinking ahead, I don't know if I thought 10 years ago that we would be sitting in an AI world and paper mills at the time. So I don't know what the next 10 years will bring, but I do hope that as publishers, we have better tools to verify authorship and verify data. As Marie mentioned about getting the authenticity of data from the start of research all the way through publication will be huge. I'm not sure with AI generated text and data, if we don't have those tools, it's going to be much harder for us to know what's valid and, created as more of an art project than a scientific work. We really do need more tools to verify who our authors are, and then the data that goes along with that work. That to me is where I think we could rest a little bit better if we could better verify the content coming in.
Marie?
Yes. Wow, in a nutshell, in 5 years, I hope that we will be shifting, as I mentioned a bit earlier, from this policing of individual manuscripts to more of a stewardship of the full life cycle of research, not just publishers, but in general, that this is where it's going to be, with more, yes, data validation at the institutional level, and just overall a more open scholarly environment, right? And credit for all the different steps of the process. You're going to get credit for the code, the protocol, the methods. And then going back to retract will be in a way easier because you're going to be able to retract the piece of literature that has the mistake. If it was the data, you retract the data. If it was the method, you retract the method, and the rest can still be useful to the community in some way. And at the same time, AI will be everywhere in research. It will no longer be, am I allowed to use AI to do this? It will be, how is that AI governed and disclosed and audited? How can I understand? So a lot more of just training and governance around AI. And I think, overall, our work will evolve into more stewardship and coordination of AI-assisted integrity ecosystem, rather than this kind of solitary gatekeepers that we're doing now a bit in the shadows.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Adya?
Yeah, it's actually really similar to some of the things that have already been said. But when I think about 5 years from now, I'm thinking about how roles and responsibilities of these distinct stakeholders in the research ecosystem might start to blur a little bit. So we'll start seeing research integrity specialists at a much earlier stage in the process. There might be people in the research community who might start to police themselves so that we don't have to do it. And we'll start to see a little bit more of editorial responsibilities come through to publishers. We're already talking about peer review, monitoring, editorial screening. I think that will be a much bigger conversation in 5 years. And it'll be really interesting to see how the research community reacts to that, actually.
Thank you, Adya. Now we move to our final poll. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you for taking the polls. So it looks like AI is there and stronger global integrity standards. And this is something that most of the panel is already working on. And I think we're going to see a lot of great standards and collaboration in that area moving forward. I'm not sure we'll have time for questions. If you have any questions, please post them and we'll follow up in the by email. And we really thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists, Christina, Marie, Tim, Adya, for such a rich and insightful discussion and for the vital work that you do each day to safeguard research integrity. And thank you so much to all our attendees participations. And these conversations demonstrate how essential such discussions are as we navigate the challenges ahead. And you'll receive a link to the webinar recording shortly after we conclude. And we'll get back to you if you have any questions that have not been answered. On behalf of Integra, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to continuing this dialogue in forthcoming events. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.